I never thought it would end like this. Tom Reed stared at the door, still hearing the laughter from the living room, the sound of his wife's voice echoing in his mind. Olivia, the woman he'd spent 23 years with, was sitting with friends, laughing and enjoying the evening. He walked into the room, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. The moment he stepped through the door, she said it. Honestly, this marriage has a year left. Max? Her friends laughed, and Tom felt the blood drain from his face. He had always thought their relationship was solid. He worked hard, overtime after overtime, believing in the American dream. He'd spent years building a life for them, a house with a white picket fence, a steady job, and a family he thought was untouchable. But in that moment, Olivia shattered everything. Then let's not waste a year, he said, his voice calm, almost cold. His heart raced, but his expression remained steady, like steel. Olivia's smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough. The room fell silent, her friends unsure of how to react. Without another word, Tom turned and walked out, leaving behind the woman who had just crushed him. 10 minutes later, he was back in his room, packing a duffel bag. His movements were mechanical. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was numb, lost in disbelief. He was trying to make sense of the hurt, trying to process the betrayal. This is it, he whispered to himself. I'm done. Every item he packed felt like another step away from a life he thought he knew. A life that had been nothing but a lie. The sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket broke the silence, but he ignored it. Olivia, of course. The flood of text messages. We need to talk, one said. I'm sorry, please come home. Tom didn't pick up. His mind was clear. There was nothing to talk about anymore. There was no more working things out. That was gone. The world outside felt unreal. He needed to focus. So, he left the apartment, driving aimlessly until he found himself in a rundown motel off Route 14. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a sickly glow over the faded carpet. He threw his bag on the bed, ignoring the cheap, musty smell of the room. He wasn't thinking about the mess. He was thinking about the betrayal. He took a breath, steadying himself. That's when the phone buzzed again. It was from Vanessa, a friend of Olivia's. What you heard last night wasn't just her venting, the message said. Tom's heart skipped. She's been planning this with a lawyer. She's been working behind your back for months. Tom felt his stomach twist. The world he'd known for over 2 decades was nothing more than a house of cards ready to fall. He sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone in his hands. His mind raced as the weight of Vanessa's words sank in. Olivia hadn't just been distant. She had a plan. And Tom had been nothing more than a pawn. But he wouldn't be a pawn any longer. This was no longer about fixing things, about making amends. This was about taking control. He stood up, determined. He was done being the guy who was always second. It was time to fight for his life. His real life. The one he had lost somewhere along the way. Tom sat in the dimly lit motel room, the buzzing of the neon sign outside flickering in sync with his heartbeat. His phone vibrated once again, the screen flashing a message from Vanessa. She's been planning this. A lawyer. Documents. She's been working against you for months. His hands trembled as he read the words over and over again. He had been betrayed, but he wasn't about to sit back and take it. Not anymore. He thought back to the years he spent with Olivia, how they built their life together, brick by brick. He thought they were partners. But in the end, she wasn't just his wife, she was a strategist, carefully plotting his downfall without him even knowing. He shook his head, pushing those thoughts aside. He had more important things to focus on now. There was no turning back. The past was gone, and all that mattered was what came next. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was Olivia, the woman he had loved for so long. Please come home. We need to talk. Her words were laced with desperation, but he wasn't fooled. He'd seen enough to know the truth. Tom glanced at the time. It was nearly midnight, and the streets outside were quiet. But his mind was loud. His heart beat faster. With each passing second, he had to act. He stood up, grabbed his bag, and headed out the door. The world outside was cold, but inside him, there was a fire starting to burn. He wasn't going to let Olivia or anyone else control him any longer. He walked to the car, took a deep breath, and drove into the night. He had a plan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life. The man he had been was gone, but the man he was going to become? That man was just beginning to take shape. Tom drove to the office of the lawyer Vanessa had mentioned. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as the miles ticked by. He had no idea what he was going to say, but he knew it didn't matter. This was the only path left for him. As he arrived, he parked in front of the small office building and stepped out of the car. The air was cool against his face, but it felt refreshing. He walked in, a quiet determination in his step. Inside, the lawyer, Caldwell, was already waiting. The man looked up, his eyes sharp, as if he could tell Tom wasn't here for a casual chat. "I've read the messages. I've heard the story. You're not the first to walk through that door," Caldwell said, his voice steady and calm. "But I can help you." Tom sat down across from him, not wasting time with pleasantries. "I need to protect myself," Tom said. "I need to make sure that what's mine stays mine." Caldwell nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We can do that. But we need to move fast. Time is not on your side." Tom felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in days, he felt like he had control again. They went over the documents, the plans, and the strategy. Tom signed papers, each one marking the beginning of his new path. There would be no more secrets, no more lies. And certainly no more manipulation. Olivia wouldn't know what hit her. Caldwell assured him everything was in place. With his legal team on standby, Tom could finally take action. The next step was to face Olivia. He wasn't sure how she would react, but he knew it didn't matter. What mattered now was making sure he walked away with everything that was rightfully his. His future was in his hands, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. Tom sat in the small, dimly lit office, the weight of everything he had learned over the past few days pressing down on him. The papers Caldwell handed him were heavy with significance, but they were his lifeline. For the first time in weeks, Tom felt the faintest glimmer of hope. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't trapped. He had a choice, and it was his to make. After signing the final document, he sat back, staring at the lawyer across from him. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying the exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a burden for too long. Caldwell leaned forward, folding his hands. "Now, we put the plan into motion. We file the papers. We get the evidence. Olivia won't know what hit her." Tom nodded, feeling a chill run through him. The anger that had been simmering in his chest for days was finally starting to take shape. He wasn't going to let Olivia tear apart everything they had built together. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. "I want to make sure she pays for what she's done," Tom said, his voice firm. Caldwell gave him a hard look, then nodded. "She will. But we have to be careful. We don't want to give her any chance to turn this around. We'll play this by the book, Tom. No emotions, just strategy." Tom stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. This wasn't just about protecting his assets. This was about reclaiming his life. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, and he meant it. He walked out of the office, his mind already racing through the next steps. It was time to face Olivia. It was time to confront the woman who had betrayed him, who had stolen so much from him without even looking back. He could still see her face when she had told him their marriage had a year left. He could still hear her laugh, the sound that had cut through him like a knife. It had been a simple sentence, but it had shattered everything. The house they had built, the life they had created, all of it seemed meaningless in that moment. Now, all that was left was the mess they had made, and it was up to him to clean it up. He had to be strong. He had to stay focused. He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. He got in his car and drove home. The closer he got, the more the tension in his chest built. What would he find when he walked through the door? Would Olivia be there, waiting for him? Would she try to explain herself, to justify everything she had done? Or would she continue to hide behind her perfect mask? As he pulled into the driveway, Tom felt the familiar knot in his stomach. This was it. He was about to take the first step in reclaiming his life. He got out of the car and walked up to the door, his hands steady but his heart pounding. He opened the door, and the silence hit him immediately. Olivia wasn't home. The house felt empty, cold, like a place where nothing mattered anymore. He walked through the rooms, his mind racing, trying to figure out his next move. He had the evidence. He had the plan. Now, all that was left was to confront the woman who had torn everything apart. He would make her see what she had done. He would make her face the consequences. Tom stood in the quiet of his empty house, the silence pressing against him. He had expected to confront Olivia, to hear her explanations, to see her face when the truth finally came to light. But she wasn't here. The house felt like a shell, hollow and lifeless, as though every piece of it had been built on a lie. He walked through the living room, the scent of their once shared life still lingering in the air. There were pictures on the walls, framed moments that once held meaning but now seemed like ghosts. Tom ran his fingers over the back of the couch, where he and Olivia had spent countless evenings together. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a betrayal. He moved through the house slowly, methodically, as if trying to piece together the life that had crumbled so easily in front of him. Every step felt heavy, like he was walking through someone else's memories. When he reached the kitchen, his eyes fell on the coffee mug sitting by the sink, the same one Olivia used every morning. It was a reminder of the normalcy he had lost, the routine that had been shattered in an instant. He turned away from it, pushing the thought out of his mind. He couldn't afford to get caught up in memories. What mattered now was the next step. Tom picked up his phone and dialed Caldwell's number. The phone rang twice before Caldwell answered, his voice calm, professional. "Tom? It's time," Tom said, his voice steady. "I have the evidence. I need you to move forward with the papers. I'm done waiting." Caldwell paused for a moment, then replied, "Understood. We'll make sure it's done right. It's time to end this." Tom ended the call and set the phone down, his hands trembling slightly. He had spent so much time avoiding the inevitable, convincing himself that things could go back to normal, that they could fix their marriage. But now, there was no going back. Olivia had crossed the line, and there was nothing left for him to hold on to. As he stood in the quiet kitchen, Tom realized that this wasn't just about saving his assets anymore. It wasn't just about the betrayal, or the lies. It was about reclaiming control of his life, of his future. He wasn't going to let Olivia have the power anymore. He was going to take it back. He turned toward the front door, his mind already racing with the steps he would take next. The legal battle was just the beginning. But this was his chance to rebuild, to start over, and to finally find peace. Tom walked out of the house, his footsteps steady and purposeful. The night air was cool, and the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter now. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a path forward. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was in control. Tom spent the next few days waiting. Every minute that ticked by felt like an eternity, but he knew there was nothing he could do but wait for the next step to unfold. Olivia had yet to return home, and Tom had no intention of chasing her down. He had done enough of that in the past. It was her turn now. His phone buzzed again, and Tom glanced at the screen. It was a message from Caldwell. "The papers are ready. We can file them tomorrow." Tom took a deep breath, his heart pounding as the finality of it all hit him. He wasn't just ending a marriage. He was closing a chapter of his life he had spent 23 years writing. But he wasn't sad. No, there was no room for sadness anymore. Just anger. Anger at the betrayal. Anger at the lies. But most of all, anger at himself for allowing it to go on for as long as it had. Tom knew he couldn't keep living in this place, in this house, where every corner held memories of a life that was no longer his. He couldn't be surrounded by the ghost of what once was. So, he made a decision. He'd leave. He needed a fresh start. Packing his belongings felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders, even as the pain of it all lingered. As he packed, his mind wandered back to the moments that led up to this. He remembered the late nights spent at work, the business trips, the dinners where Olivia had pretended everything was fine. He remembered the little things, the way she used to laugh at his jokes, the way she would hold his hand when they went out. He had cherished those moments, thinking they were signs of a happy marriage. But now, all of that seemed like a lie. His hands shook slightly as he folded his clothes, each item reminding him of what he had lost. But Tom wasn't the same man who had walked into this house months ago. He had found strength in the face of betrayal. He had found a part of himself that he didn't know existed. He wasn't going to let Olivia destroy him. As the last of his things were packed, Tom stood by the door, his gaze lingering on the empty house. He wasn't sure when he'd be back, or if he would be back at all. This house, this life, had no place for him anymore. He turned and walked out, shutting the door behind him with a soft click. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, but Tom didn't look back. He had already made up his mind. The future was his to shape now. He wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Olivia, decide it for him. Tom climbed into his car, the engine purring to life as he drove away from the house that had once been his home. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt free. The pain, the betrayal, the confusion, it was all behind him now. It was time to build something new. Something real. Tom sat in his car, parked outside of the lawyer's office. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of the past few weeks hung heavily on his shoulders. The decision was made. The papers were ready. The end of his marriage was inevitable. Olivia wouldn't be able to stop this now. He checked his watch. It was almost time. He had planned every step meticulously. No room for mistakes, no room for hesitation. He couldn't afford either. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, and he took a deep breath. The fresh start he had hoped for was finally within his reach. He wasn't going to let it slip away. He got out of the car and walked into the building with a purpose, his steps steady. The door to the office opened with a soft click, and the receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Reed's right on time," she said, gesturing toward the conference room. Tom nodded and made his way to the room where Caldwell was waiting. The lawyer stood as he entered, his expression calm, but Tom could tell by the way he moved that the moment had arrived. "We're ready," Caldwell said, his voice professional, but with a certain edge to it. Tom felt a jolt of energy. This was it. The moment everything changed. "Let's do it," Tom replied, his voice firm, no trace of doubt. Caldwell handed him the final documents. "This is it. Once you sign, it's over. Olivia will have no choice but to face the consequences." Tom took the pen in his hand and signed his name at the bottom of the paper. It was over. The life he had known was gone. The woman he had loved for so many years was no longer his concern. Tom stood up, looking at the papers one last time. He didn't feel relief. Not yet. There was still work to be done. Olivia had built her world around lies, and now it was time to tear that world down. But Tom wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for his own freedom. The freedom to live a life of his choosing, without being haunted by the ghost of a marriage that no longer existed. He walked out of the office with his head held high, the weight of the past lifted. It felt strange. Like he was walking into a new life. As he stepped into the elevator, he glanced at his reflection in the mirrored walls. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him. It was someone new. Someone who had been forged in the fire of betrayal and pain. Someone who knew what it meant to take control. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out into the bright daylight, the world feeling like a place of possibilities. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in the driver's seat. Olivia's world had crumbled. And Tom was finally free to build his own. Tom hadn't heard from Olivia since the papers were filed. He had expected her to reach out, to try to talk her way out of it, but nothing. The silence was deafening. He spent the next few days moving into his new apartment, sorting through the mess of his life. It was a small place, but it felt like freedom. There were no memories here, no ghosts of what had been. Just a blank slate, waiting for him to start over. The first few nights were the hardest. Alone in the quiet, Tom could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. But each morning, when he woke up, he felt a little stronger. A little freer. His phone buzzed one afternoon as he was sitting in his new living room, a cup of coffee in hand. It was from Caldwell. Olivia's lawyer reached out. She wants to settle. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Settling meant she was giving up. It was the first sign that Olivia knew she had lost. Tom thought about it for a moment. He didn't want to settle. He didn't want to go back into the mess he had just escaped from. But he knew he had to be smart. This wasn't about winning. This was about moving on. He had to make. Sure, Olivia paid for the betrayal. But he wasn't going to play her game. He wasn't going to be the one begging. He dialed Caldwell's number. "I'm not settling. I want everything," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Make sure she understands that." Caldwell hesitated. "Are you sure? She's offering a large sum to avoid a public court case." Tom paused. He could already hear Olivia's voice in his head, trying to convince him that they could work things out, trying to play on his emotions. But he wasn't that man anymore. He had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him again. "I'm sure," Tom replied. "We go all the way. Let's finish this." He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the city skyline. There was something satisfying about knowing he had control now. The power had shifted. Olivia was no longer in charge. She had taken him for granted for so long, but now it was his turn. Tom felt a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had been afraid for so long, afraid of losing everything, afraid of being left with nothing. But now, he realized, he had everything he needed. He had himself. He had the strength to walk away. The ability to rebuild. And most importantly, he had the freedom to choose his own path. Olivia had made her choice. And now it was his turn to make his. He wasn't going to waste any more time on the past. The future was waiting for him, and it was up to him to seize it. Tom sat at his new apartment, staring at his phone, waiting for the call. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't oppressive or cold. It was simply empty, and for the first time, he didn't mind the absence of noise. The world outside was still moving, but he was no longer attached to the chaos of his past. The weight of the legal battle was still heavy, but Tom felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer caught in the trap of trying to please Olivia or fit into the life they had built. That life was gone now. He could hear the phone buzz. It was a message from Caldwell. Olivia's lawyer agreed to the terms. "We're moving forward with the full settlement." Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was over. He had won. But more than that, he had taken back control. He wasn't going to be the man who let his world crumble at someone else's hands anymore. The next day, Tom walked into the lawyer's office, the familiar setting now feeling less like a place of dread and more like a symbol of his new beginning. Caldwell greeted him with a smile that didn't feel forced. "We're set. The papers are filed, and everything is in motion. This is it." Tom nodded, his gaze steady. He wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, maybe. But mostly, he felt free. Caldwell continued. "Olivia's lawyer is preparing to finalize the division. You'll have everything you're entitled to. It's the cleanest break we could have hoped for." Tom stood, feeling the weight of it all settle in. "Thank you," he said, his voice firm. He shook Caldwell's hand, knowing this chapter of his life was officially closed. As Tom left the office, he couldn't help but feel a strange peace. The legal fight had taken its toll, but it had also given him something priceless. The ability to move on. To rebuild. To choose what came next. He walked outside into the bright sunshine, the warm breeze hitting his face as he looked around. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. It was his to shape. He drove back to his apartment, the streets now seeming to stretch before him, full of endless possibilities. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions, of betrayal and heartache, but today, he felt something different. He felt empowered. For the first time in years, Tom was in the driver's seat. And it was up to him where he went next. As he pulled into his parking spot, Tom took one last look at the world outside. It was a world he had once shared with Olivia, but now it was his alone to navigate. He walked up the steps to his apartment, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the next chapter of his life had already begun. The weeks that followed were quieter, almost too quiet. Tom settled into a routine, the kind of routine he hadn't had in years. He spent his days focusing on himself, on what was important to him. He had always put Olivia first, always tried to make things work for her, but now he was putting himself at the center of his own life. It felt strange at first, but as the days passed, it began to feel natural. His apartment, small and simple, was a far cry from the life he had shared with Olivia, but it was his. He never realized how much he had given up until he was finally free. At work, Tom found himself immersed in projects he had put on the back burner for too long. His colleagues noticed the change. The man who had always seemed weighed down by his personal life was now focused, driven, his mind sharp. For the first time in years, Tom felt like he was finally living for himself. But even in the midst of all this change, there were moments when he would think about the past, about Olivia, and wonder how it all went so wrong. He had loved her. He had wanted to make things work. But she had made her choice, and he had made his. It was the way of life. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could control what came next. One afternoon, as he was leaving work, Tom ran into someone he hadn't seen in a while. It was Vanessa, the woman who had helped him gather the evidence, the one who had spoken the truth when no one else would. She was standing by her car, waiting for him. "Tom," she said with a smile, "I've been meaning to check in on you. How are you doing?" Tom returned her smile, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "I'm doing well," he said. "Better than I expected, actually. It's been a strange journey, but I think I'm finally getting to a place where I can breathe again." Vanessa nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve it." There was a brief silence between them, both of them aware of the weight of the past but choosing not to dwell on it. "I've been thinking," Tom said after a moment, "about everything that happened. I'm not sure what's next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can choose." Vanessa smiled again, a little more knowingly this time. "That's the most important part, Tom. You get to choose now. The rest? It'll fall into place." Tom nodded, feeling something inside him shift. He wasn't sure where he was going, but for the first time, he didn't feel lost. The future felt open, full of possibilities. He wasn't the same man he had been when all of this started, but he was okay with that. He had learned that the past didn't define him, and neither did Olivia. He was his own person, and that was enough. As Tom walked away from the encounter with Vanessa, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted that he hadn't even realized was there. He wasn't running from the past anymore. He was walking toward his future. And whatever came next, he was ready for it. Tom stood by his window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. He had come a long way in the past few months, but it still felt like he was just beginning. The decisions he had made, the changes he had gone through, they weren't easy, but they had led him to this moment. A moment of clarity. A moment of freedom. The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Caldwell. "The final settlement papers are ready. It's over." Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had expected this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to feel. Relief? Vindication? Maybe a little bit of both. But most of all, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. He walked over to his desk and sat down, staring at the screen for a moment before picking up his phone. He dialed Caldwell's number. "I'm ready," Tom said, his voice steady. "Let's make it official." "It's done," Caldwell replied, a note of finality in his voice. "You're free." Tom nodded, even though Caldwell couldn't see him. He hadn't realized just how much he needed to hear those words until now. Free. It was a word that held so much power. Tom had been living in a prison of his own making for so long, shackled by the lies and manipulation of his past. But now, he was free. He didn't have to answer to anyone. He didn't have to pretend anymore. This was his life, his future, and he was going to live it on his own terms. "Thank you," Tom said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I owe you." "You did the hard work," Caldwell replied. "Now it's time to move forward." Tom ended the call and sat back in his chair, his mind racing with the possibilities. What now? Where did he go from here? He had no answers, but that was okay. For the first time in a long time, he didn't need to have it all figured out. He had time. He had his health. And most importantly, he had the freedom to make choices that were his alone. He could feel the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders, and as the minutes passed, he felt lighter. The man who had walked into this journey months ago, unsure of what the future held, was gone. In his place was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone ready to take on whatever life had in store for him next. Tom got up from his desk and walked to the door, pausing before he left. He looked around his apartment, the space that had become his sanctuary. This was his new beginning. No more lies. No more secrets. Just a man and his future, ready to take the next step. He stepped out the door and into the night, the world full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Tom spent the next few weeks taking each day as it came. The freedom he had fought for felt like a new world, one where he was in control, no longer weighed down by the past. He focused on his work, rediscovered old hobbies, and even started taking long walks around the city, enjoying the simple things he had neglected for years. But even in the midst of his new routine, there were moments when memories of Olivia would flash in his mind. It wasn't that he missed her, but rather the life they had shared. The idea of what they could have been. He couldn't help but wonder how it had all gone so wrong. But those thoughts didn't linger. They couldn't. He had learned that there was no point in dwelling on the past, no point in chasing ghosts. His phone buzzed one morning, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Caldwell. "The settlement is final. The money has been transferred. It's done." Tom stared at the message for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. It was official now. Olivia was out of his life, and he was free to start anew. But as he put his phone down, he realized something. He had done it. He had taken back his life, piece by piece, and now he had the chance to build something better. He wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was excited by it. A few days later, Tom received a letter in the mail. It was from Olivia's lawyer, informing him that Olivia was officially requesting to meet. Tom didn't know what to expect, but he knew he wasn't interested in getting pulled back into her web. He had moved on. He had chosen freedom. And he wasn't going to let her take that away from him. He thought about it for a moment, then made a decision. He was going to meet her. Not because he wanted to fix anything, but because he needed closure. He needed to see her one last time, to know that this chapter was truly over. The day of the meeting arrived, and Tom stood outside the cafe, waiting. He felt calm, strangely calm, as if all the emotions he had felt in the past were no longer a part of him. He wasn't angry anymore or sad. He was just done. Olivia arrived, looking the same as ever, but Tom could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't the same woman he had married. She had changed, just as he had. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment either of them spoke. Olivia was the first to break the silence. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Tom," she said quietly. Tom looked at her, but didn't say anything. He wasn't here to listen to her apologies. He was here for his own peace. "I know you have," he finally said. "But I'm done. I'm moving on. And I'm not looking back." Olivia nodded, the tension in the air thick. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom stood up, ready to leave, but before he did, he looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Olivia," he said. It wasn't said with anger, but with the finality of a chapter closed. He walked out of the cafe, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a true sense of freedom. He had let go of the past, and he was ready to move forward into whatever came next. The weeks following the meeting with Olivia felt surreal for Tom. He had said goodbye to that chapter of his life, and with each passing day, the weight of the past seemed to lift just a little more. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when he missed the comfort of familiarity, even if it had been built on lies. But those moments were fleeting. The peace he had gained was stronger than the pain of what he had lost. Tom threw himself into his work with newfound energy. His colleagues noticed the change. He was sharper, more focused, more present. For the first time in years he felt like he was doing something for himself, not for anyone else. He had always put others first, always tried to fix things for people who didn't appreciate it. But now, he was finally living for himself. His weekends, once filled with quiet resignation, were now his own. He started taking small trips, exploring the city he had lived in for so long but never truly seen. He went to art galleries, walked in parks, dined at places he had always passed by. It wasn't about escaping, but about rediscovering the joy of simply being. One Saturday afternoon, while sitting in a small cafe with a book, Tom felt a tap on his shoulder. He looked up to see a woman standing there, a warm smile on her face. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. Tom recognized her immediately. It was Vanessa, the woman who had helped him through the darkest parts of his journey. The one who had been there when he needed to see the truth. "Vanessa," he said with a smile. "It's been a while." She sat down across from him, and they quickly fell into conversation, as if no time had passed. They talked about the past few months, about the changes they had each gone through, about the future. Tom was surprised at how easy it felt to talk to her. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just two people, sharing a moment. Vanessa listened attentively as Tom shared how he had been adjusting to his new life. She shared her own experiences, too. There was a depth to her that Tom hadn't noticed before, a calm strength that made him feel at ease. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even about that. It was about companionship, about finding someone who understood. As they talked, Tom realized something. He had spent so long feeling lost, as if his life had been determined by others. But now, he was in control. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to be himself. Vanessa seemed to sense this, too. When they finished their coffee, she gave him a warm smile and stood up. "Take care of yourself, Tom," she said, her tone genuine. "You deserve all the peace you've fought for." Tom watched her leave, and as he sat there, he felt something shift inside him. It was like the final piece had fallen into place. He wasn't alone. Not really. He had everything he needed inside of him. And as he looked out the window, watching the world move on around him, Tom felt ready for whatever came next. The past was behind him, and the future was his to embrace. Tom woke up to a quiet morning, the sun filtering through the curtains of his apartment. It had been a few months since his life had turned upside down, and in that time, he had learned to embrace the calm that came with letting go. The legal battle, the heartache, the uncertainty, it was all behind him now. What lay ahead was a future that he could shape, free from the chains of the past. As he made his coffee, Tom thought back to the first days after the divorce. The shock, the disbelief, the loneliness, they had all been overwhelming. But gradually, things had started to settle. He had built a routine, found comfort in the simplicity of everyday life. Work had become a place of focus and fulfillment, and his new apartment, small but his own, had become a sanctuary. He had started taking care of himself, going to the gym, eating better, finding ways to rediscover joy in the little things. Tom had never realized how much of himself he had lost in the years he spent trying to fix a relationship that wasn't meant to be. He had put all his energy into Olivia, into the life they built together, thinking that if he just worked hard enough, things would improve. But now, he understood. It wasn't about fixing someone else. It was about taking care of himself, about finding his own happiness. The phone buzzed on the counter, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Vanessa. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Tom smiled as he read the message. Vanessa had been there for him when he needed someone, offering support without any expectations. It was a friendship that had grown, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt that he wasn't alone. He quickly typed a reply. I'm doing great. Thanks for checking in. Let's catch up soon. After sending the message, Tom sat back and took a deep breath. He was in a good place. He was no longer bound by the past, no longer held back by the mistakes and regrets of his former life. He had learned to move forward, to embrace the uncertainty of the future with hope instead of fear. As he looked out the window, Tom realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, he knew that whatever came next, he would be ready for it. The future was his to create, and he wasn't going to waste it. He stood up, ready to take on the day. The world was waiting, and this time, Tom was going to make the most of it.